tech difficulties today. So, Nicole, thanks so much for being here. Before I turn it over to you and ask you all of these really awesome questions that everyone submitted, I just want to let everybody on the call know a little bit about you. So Nicole is the founder and managing partner of the Law Offices of N.D. Galli. It's a litigation and intellectual property firm based out of Philadelphia. She also has an office in New York. She's also the founder and president of Women Own Law, which is an amazing national networking organization that's dedicated to empowering and supporting women entrepreneurs in the law. We've partnered with them for Miss JD. They were the winner of one of our Miss JD awards this year at the conference, so I'm very happy to be able to have that partnership. So Nicole's practice focuses on commercial and IP litigation, strategic IP counseling, and trade secret protection. She's a frequent speaker, author, and thought leader on issues impacting women attorneys and entrepreneurs, as well as on various legal topics, including intellectual property strategy, trade secret protection and litigation, trademarks, copyright, patent law and litigation, commercial litigation best practices, and litigation financing. She's had a fantastic year. She was selected as one of Philadelphia Business Journal's Women of Distinction for being one of the most influential business women in the region. She's been selected as an Equity Project Champion, which is part of a group of legal leaders who advocate for Burford Capital's initiative to close the gender gap by providing $50 million pool of capital earmarked for financing commercial litigation matters led by women. In addition, she was just named as a Tory Burch Foundation Fellow, which is an organization that's and a program that's designed to support female entrepreneurs. So a big congratulations, Nicole, for that.
Thank you.
And she received her BA from the University of Pennsylvania and her JD also from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She's admitted to practice in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware, and numerous federal courts. So definitely a lot of really great background and information that she's going to share with us today. So before we get started, I'm just going to ask if everybody could do me a favor and please mute yourself. We usually end up with a decent amount of background noise, so that would just make it a little bit easier for us. I appreciate that. And all right, we will get started. So, Nicole, one of the questions that really popped up a lot when we were talking and talking at the conference and going through these email questions that people had submitted is kind of what are the things that you want to think about before you think of going out on your own or starting your own practice?
Yeah, absolutely. And first, let me thank you guys for having me. I'm really excited to be here and to be talking with all of you about this. I think that entrepreneurship is the absolute best. And it's looking like we're not, because it's linking to my phone, we're not seeing me, but okay, I'm not sure we do that. So to answer the question about what you should be thinking about, there's a lot of different things. I mean, first of all, I guess one threshold question is where you are in your career, whether you already have developed a book of business or whether you're really striking out without having an existing book. I think that, depending on how you are doing it, both of, those are both feasible and both possible. Personally, I'm a little concerned, just as a senior attorney in the profession, I'm a little bit concerned about folks who are starting out just straight out of law school. I know that especially, say for instance, back with the recession, that ended up being sort of the only choice people had. So if possible, I think there's really a lot of benefits to getting mentorship and training by working with another attorney. You can still do that even if you're starting your own practice from scratch, but that to me would be something that you would want to think about, which is who are you, and really at any point in time in your career. I mean, even today, I've been practicing 27 years, and I'll run into things that I need to ask another lawyer about or I want to get input on, whether it's because it's not my practice area or even, to get a second opinion on something in my practice area. And so, you do need to think about a network if you, don't already have one, and how you're going to get sort of the advice and resources that you need. So that would sort of be the first thing, right, which is being a competent and good attorney. And, you need to think about that if you're going to be in your own firm from the very, very beginning, how you're going to make sure that you get the guidance and support and training that you might need. But let's assume that you've been practicing at least for a few years with someone else, and so you have at least somewhat of a network of, sort of advisors and mentors from a professional standpoint. Then the question is, what are you going to do for business? Because, obviously if you have a book already, it's a lot easier to get started. If, you don't have a book, then to me, it's not really all that much different. In terms of the steps that you go through to build a book, whether you're doing it as a solo attorney or, if you partner with someone else, or whether you do it as, an attorney in another firm. I mean, you have to network, you have to do all those things that would lead to business development. But, big difference if you're on your own is that you don't have an income of some kind to fall back on. So it makes it more urgent. So I think you need to think through that, and you need to, if you're starting without a book and you are currently employed, it's just like starting any other business. You want to make sure you've got some money in the bank to tide you over while you get started. 6 months to a year is probably not an unreasonable amount of money. Or if, depending on where you are, can you access capital or access living capital, if you will, in some other way, whether it's a line of credit if you already own a house, for instance. I will advise you in terms of doing something like getting a line of credit or even credit cards, easier to do when you're employed by someone else than if you're self-employed. So, I would think through all those practical financial realities. Beyond that, it's not rocket science to start a law firm. There's good resources out there. One of the advisory board members for Women-Owned Law is Carolyn Elephant, and she writes a lot. She has myshingle.com, and she has some checklists. I know I used them when I was starting my practice. I believe she's got a book or two. There's other folks and other resources out there. So it's really thinking about sort of the nuts and bolts of what you're going to need. And, the general advice would be start as leanly as you can, but there are things you may choose to invest in. And some of that is knowing yourself and your strengths and knowing what your practice is going to need. So for instance, when I started, I did start with a part-time administrator, part-time admin, and she's still with me. Because I knew that my temperament was such, and the way I had practiced for 25 years or so was such, that I was not the kind of person to want to be doing my own billing and my own, timekeeping in terms of entering it into a software and, other administrative tasks. That was just really, not going to work for me. And the amount of time that it was going to take me to do those things was better spent on marketing and better spent on billing. But that was a significant investment, and that's not right for everyone. I would say most people choose, if they're a solo, to start without any staff at all. Then I also hear from people the best thing they ever did was get some staff because it freed up their time to really generate more business. So that's a personal decision, but that's probably one of the big ones. That and real estate is another really big expense. Whether you need to have an office. I'd say probably most lawyers these days don't. It really depends on your practice, though. If you have what I'd call a consumer-facing practice, so family law, maybe some criminal law, personal injury, where you're meeting with individuals, you're probably more likely to need some kind of an office setup than if you're working with businesses, because businesses tend not to just, want to come by and meet with you. They're often very used to working virtually themselves. So that's, again, one of those things you need to look at. And those are, I would say staffing and real estate are probably the two big questions. But that's all sort of what I would call practical stuff. The bigger question is to really know yourself and to understand whether you're somebody who wants to have a business. There's a difference, too, between being totally a solo practitioner, where it's just really you doing your work and you're an individual contributor, versus someone who's really viewing, starting a firm as running a business that they want to grow, and don't want to have just be themselves. So you really need to understand your temperament and whether that's going to be a good fit for you, or are you going to be someone who needs to have, lots of support and, be able to call up somebody, especially if you're in a large firm, 24/7 to help you with administrative tasks, for example. So it's very personal and it's not for everybody. That was a long answer to a short question, but those are the things you need to think about.
Very thorough. So you kind of mentioned this, the personal aspect of it, and I think that can sometimes be the hardest part. How did you battle kind of those what ifs, what if this doesn't work out, all of those things, and take that leap to go out on your own?
So you're exactly right that you need to think about that, right? Like you have to think about, that is what goes through your mind. At least it did for me. What if this doesn't work? But it's interesting because I remember I was about a year into having my own firm, and a very successful entrepreneur here in Philadelphia. She was a physician who started a tech company in the medical field, and she ended up speaking. She was heading up a group of women entrepreneurs. She'd had her business about 9 years. She was speaking to some of us, and it was actually another person that sort of sparked her comment. Because the person was 2 years in and was feeling the struggle. She was not a lawyer, but she was like, I don't know if this is working, and, it's kind of difficult, and I feel like I've got all these challenges. And what the woman said was, you always feel like that, right? Like the question is, why businesses fail and why people don't succeed. It's not because it isn't hard, and it's not because they don't get discouraged at times, but it's a question of sticking with it and figuring it out. And that was really a pivotal moment for me, because the lesson there was, it's not that you start out and you steadily succeed, right? Like there's going to be, and this woman said, like, she had her business 9 years and she still has times where she's like, they run into a new issue and a problem and she thinks she might lose her whole business, And I'm like, oh, that's kind of alarming. But it was also encouraging in a way, because the message was, it's not about having, avoiding bad things happening. It's not about, being 100% successful all the time, but rather about how you deal with problems, how you deal with the uncertainty. And the article actually that I gave you to circulate to everyone after talks about that. Entrepreneurs have to be eternally optimistic, and they have to be willing to live with ambiguity and uncertainty and risk and failure. And that's not a typical, and the whole point of the article is why most lawyers can't really be entrepreneurs, because that's sort of the exact opposite of what we're trained as lawyers, right? Like we're trained to be certain and to avoid risk like the plague or minimize it. And we're somewhat trained to be pessimistic, like look for everything bad that can go wrong and try to figure out how you're going to avoid it or solve it. So it's really been an experience in just kind of living with the discomfort, and just sort of being willing to sit there and, really listen to yourself and figure out, am I afraid because a healthy fear is reasonable because it is an unknown? or is this just really not for me? Is this really not a good idea? And what I find is that, just sitting with the discomfort, actually right now have a big business opportunity in front of me that is actually something I've been trying to get. It's confidential, so I can't go into it right now, but it's something I've been wanting to do for the business for a while. And I didn't think was going to happen. And then I found out recently that the opportunity is available, and it's bringing someone into my firm, and it would totally transform my business if I do this. But instead of being thrilled, my immediate reaction was, oh my gosh, I don't know. Is this good? Is this bad? What if it doesn't work? And so, I just did what I've learned to do, which is just sit with that and kind of process it and think about it. And, within a few days, I'm like, yeah, this is awesome. This is going to be great. Let's go for it. But that's not for everyone. Definitely. It's definitely not for everyone.
And when you started out on this journey, how, I know you'd worked at a firm for a while, but kind of how did you make that decision that this was the time that you were going to branch out?
Yeah, so it was actually a long time in coming. I tell the story that when I actually got admitted to the bar in New York, it was the day I got admitted, which was about a year into practice, because in New York it just takes a while, because I'm still admitted in New York. That was, I think, something we missed in the intro. But I remember my grandfather, who was an entrepreneur. He had his own hair salon with my grandmother. He was a business owner. I remember my grandfather, saying to me, like, he was just mystified that I was working for a large firm, because I was with a very large firm in New York at the time, and couldn't understand why I wasn't going into business for myself. You have a law degree. I was the first person in my family to go to law school. You have a law degree. It's, something you can just go out and start your business. Like, why would you ever work for someone else? And I remember saying to him, well, why would I not work for someone else? Like, I don't get it. My parents were teachers. That was a little surprising. And he's like, because it's so much better to work for yourself and to not have a boss. And I was like, okay. No, that wasn't what I was about to do for so many reasons. Fancy Wall Street job. Yeah, I'm going to walk away from that with all of the law school debt I had. No, I don't think so. But the idea sort of stayed with me. And the other thing was that when I went to law school, in my mind, I thought it was something I would do, be a lawyer for about 20 years, and then I thought I'd start a business. Not really related to my grandfather, just sort of thinking about it. I don't know why I had that thought. And the business I thought I'd start would be in the food industry, would be like a gourmet shop or catering and gourmet shop, because I love food. And then that dream sort of died pretty quickly, because I realized how hard folks work in that business, and that as hard as I was working, it was much harder. But the notion of having my own thing sort of was there the whole time. And so when I left Pepper Hamilton, or was thinking about leaving, which was 2009, I left there in early 2010, 10 years ago, which is kind of hard to believe. But I was thinking about what I wanted. I was a partner. I also had little kids. I had my kids as a partner. And just trying to sort of figure out whether being on my own was something that was going to be right for me. And so I talked to a ton of people I knew, in all types of areas of law, different types of firms, and including, folks who had their own firms. And it was definitely something of interest, but at the time I couldn't visualize how to have a big law type practice in a small firm. It was not as common 10 years ago, at least not here in Philadelphia and in my network. And there were two women who I knew who did it, but one of them literally just did it right then. That was Fran Greising, who also won one of the awards. In fact, when I went to meet with her, she told me this is what she was doing, but she was literally just starting. And then there was another woman that I knew who had had her own firm for about 2 or 3 years. And so it wasn't something where I had a lot of role models among women for it. And I had small children and, you know, a lot of stuff going on. And so I was like, well, this isn't, plus also the economy was, you know, just sort of starting to recover. So I had a couple offers to join a couple other firms where they were opportunities to grow the Philadelphia office of a firm not headquartered here. I ended up joining both of them one at a time, but it was kind of weird. One was really small. It was an IP litigation boutique, and then the other was about a 200-lawyer regional firm. And in both of those, I was, you know, running the offices locally, and so I sort of did what I call entrepreneurial light. I got to learn more about how you ran a law firm and just really functionally how you set up an office, because I had to do some of that for both of the firms. You know, they didn't have litigators here, IP litigators in either location. And so, you know, okay, I need a copy service, I need a delivery service. So, I mean, I was literally working through all of that. And I realized it wasn't rocket science, and, you know, it could be done. So at some point, I just decided that it was really the best thing. I knew I needed to make a change from the firm I was at. And I decided that I just was ready to go do it for myself. I wanted to control my own destiny. And I really, you know, at that point, it was becoming more common, I guess, for people to leave big law and start small firms, whether it was women or men. And, you know, I figured, why not? I can do it too. So that's how it kind of happened.
And
but it was not quick. It was definitely not quick.
No, quite a process. And what are, I guess, some of the things that you don't like as much about, you know, doing the small firm solo style? What are some things you really enjoy about it, and kind of how does that all play, the pros and cons for you?
There's honestly nothing that I do not like. I mean, there are things that, is there anything I miss? I mean, on some level, I suppose, yes. Like, it is nice to have, you know, other people you can delegate to, more, you know, different kinds of backup. But I don't miss any of that enough to make a change. I just absolutely adore being able to make all kinds of decisions for myself. Everything from, you know, what marketing I should be doing or not doing, to the rates I charge, to whether I should do flat fees, to the kinds of clients that I can work with or not work with, to, you know, if I need to do something. I always was fortunate that I was able to be fairly flexible with my schedule, but there was always this notion that someone was watching, even if it wasn't the person I was working for, and maybe it was a staff person or one of the other, you know, colleagues who was on my level. Somebody was always watching or cared about what I was doing. You know, so I have the freedom. If I need to do something with one of my kids, I do something with one of my kids. It's not, you know, there's nobody there to tell me no. I would say I'm working harder than I ever have. It's a business, right? And it's a startup business. I'm 4 years in. So I don't think I have ever worked as hard or as long or as much or as really 24/7 as I have on my own firm. But I don't mind it in the sense that it's mine. You know, I could probably be taking a little bit better care of myself, so that's definitely a drawback. You know, I do get to spend time with my family, but they do know that I work a lot. My husband's part of my firm, so it's kind of a family business. And so, you know, both of us going on vacation together at the same time can be a little challenging, but we were able to bring in a contract lawyer recently to help with some of that. But it's been great. It's really been awesome. Would not change it.
That's awesome. And when you started going out and getting, you know, your own book of business and setting everything up, what kind of networking opportunities did you take advantage of? What did you find was most helpful, and how did you prioritize the things that you wanted to get involved in so you had time to focus on the clients that you had and the admin stuff, but also on that networking and marketing section of it?
Yeah, so that's been, you used the word journey at one point. It's been a real journey since I had my firm. So the history of my personal book of business development is that I have started and grown my book 3 times. For a variety of reasons, I did it twice in prior firms, and when I left the firm that I was at right before I started, I actually didn't take a lot of business with me. The business I had at the time was stuff that I had to leave behind because it was not in my practice area or in other parts of the country. There were things that I was working on that I wasn't able to take with me because the clients were, embedded within the firm. The biggest, and one of the reasons I left, is at the time I had an opportunity to do patent litigation on the plaintiff side on a contingency fee basis. And I really wanted to do that because it's, harder and harder to get patent litigation work, especially if you're not on the defense side, especially if you're not in one of the absolute largest firms in the country. And I mean like the top 50 firms. Even, at some of the other large firms I was at, it was still challenging. And since then it's become even more so because the amount of patent litigation, which was a big area of practice for me, is shrinking. So I started with, without really any billable clients at that point. And so it was a challenge, and I was very successful my first year with it. But then really trying out different things, getting reacquainted with my network here in Philadelphia. I've always had a huge network, mostly in this area, but just something I've done. I've always done a lot of different things in the community and professionally. I have to say, and I think this is true for a lot of commercial litigators and IP litigators, the election of 2016 I think impacted people's desire to litigate, especially things like IP, which are somewhat discretionary in terms of the timing. And so, the whole of litigation was down a lot for a couple of years. And it also, people were settling matters a lot more frequently. I think that's changing now in the last year. So it was a challenge. I also had a lot of different interests that I was pursuing, a strong interest in trade secrets, for instance, in the non-litigation side of it. So what I've done in terms of, how to go out and network and get business, I mean, you just have to know what your interests are. My interests are working with women and women entrepreneurs. I like networking with other lawyers. I get along with lawyers. I get work from lawyers, a lot of work from lawyers. So, you just have to, there's no one right thing. It's very personal. And then probably the best thing I did, which I didn't do until a few years in for a variety of reasons, was to really invest in marketing, both my time and actually, bringing on a marketing person to work with us at the firm. And so, having a newsletter, writing, speaking, I used to do a lot of that. I didn't for a few years. But starting in the last year, really started doing that heavily, and that's definitely been very productive. Also thought carefully about what the services were I was offering clients, because what I was finding was that a lot of clients wanted to work with me for different things, not just litigation. And so I actually broadened. I've always done some non-litigation IP, but I hadn't done it in a while, and so really started to broaden my offerings in that regard. And just recently we brought in, as in this week, it's not even officially announced yet, but we brought in a corporate attorney because I'm finding that clients need that skill set. So that's sort of what you have to do. You have to kind of look for opportunities, but then you also have to look at what opportunities are coming to you and what the clients you're interacting with need, and figure out how best in what way you're going to serve those needs. It might be by referring stuff out. Some jurisdictions allow referral fees. It might be by partnering up with somebody. It might be by broadening what you do. But you really need to look. It's a combination of your interests and what you like to do, and then what the opportunities are that happen to be available to you. And one of the things that we did actually was completely get out of doing full contingency fee work because we found that we weren't enjoying it and the return wasn't as great. So the firm that I have today, in terms of the clients we work with and the work that we do, and the work we do is still somewhat similar, but the clients we work with and how we work with them is completely different from where it started. And that's a journey that every entrepreneur goes through. So everyone who has a new business, if you start reading about entrepreneurship, you see that, you have a product idea, you have a service idea, but then you have to listen to the market. And if it doesn't resonate with the market, you need to adjust. And, maybe it's something you didn't even think of at first, but, you look for those opportunities and then figure out how you're going to fill them.
Sounds like flexibility is really key as your practice has kind of evolved in ways that you didn't think.
And that's something you can't do in a large firm, right? Because especially a very big firm, you're super siloed. And, one of the things that was kind of frustrating to me was I wanted to do more with trade secrets. In prior firms, that was really more the purview of the employment department. And if the employment department isn't on board with IP doing more with trade secrets, well, then it doesn't happen. And so I don't have those restrictions. I can kind of do it as I see fit.
And you mentioned a little bit before how you met with a lot of people before you started out on this journey and tried to get different points of view. How did you kind of seek out these people, and how have you kind of kept mentors over the years that have been really helpful for you?
Oh, that's a really good question, and I was gonna mention that before. So, I had this conversation recently, actually, at the Girl Attorney Conference with a young lawyer who had basically asked me this question, like, how do you find mentors? How do you connect with people? And I thought about it, and I think the issue for a lot of young lawyers these days is not having a place where they can actually connect with, more senior lawyers to be mentors and advisors. When I started practicing, I found my mentors in two places, basically. One was some of them were within my workplace. So they were partners or sometimes the senior associates, right? Like it didn't have to be the partners. But then very early on, I chose to get active in bar associations, and I found that to be an amazing place to meet other lawyers, particularly more senior lawyers. And many of my mentors today, and all those people, like I said, I reached out to people. I met all those people, many of them through the Philadelphia Bar Association in particular. And when I was in New York, I was active with the New York Women's Bar Association, and I'm still connected with some of the women that I met in the 2-3 years I practiced in New York through that bar association. One of them is actually on the Women-Owned Law Advisory Board. So to me, that's the value of bar associations, is that connection. And then I've definitely gotten work from folks that I've met through bar associations, also through the ABA, for instance. I'm very involved in the IP law section and now the section of litigation. Working on projects with people and committees and teams, that's how people get to know you, and they get to know whether they can trust you and like you and, what your, credibility and style is. Job opportunities will often come for people that way. So, let alone business. So, the difficulty I think today is I know that bar associations are finding, first of all, firms may not pay for you to join bar associations as readily as they did historically. Secondly, it's always been a challenge for young lawyers to be active. Some firms support it, some firms don't. And, but I think the third thing is now, my sense would be that with so many online resources being available for people, I sort of wonder whether, while they're wonderful and they have a really important place, and, I mentioned before we got on the line, I love Girl Attorney and Mothers Esquire. I mean, there's some really amazing free online groups that you can be a part of, and I suppose that's a place to find advice. But I don't know that it's providing the same level of opportunity to collaborate with people and to get to know them well so that they can, fill that role as a mentor or an advisor or just somebody you can call up and say, I'm thinking of doing X, how did you do it or what do you think? So that's part of why I started Women-Owned Law, because I knew I needed to affirmatively have a network of similarly situated folks and particularly women around me, and that didn't exist. There is no other group that I'm aware of nationally for women entrepreneurs in the law. And so I created it because I needed it and I wanted it, and I knew if I needed it, there must be other people who did too. And, that's where I've definitely found a lot of people that I can bounce things off of and get advice. So, I think the lesson in that is twofold, which is, find a place where you can actually meet and interact with people and work with them on things so that they get to know you, because just doing it through social media isn't really going to be sufficient. And then secondly, and it could be other things. It could be your law school alumni group. It doesn't have to be a bar association, but, there's a lot of different groups that you could be involved with. And then the other thing is don't be afraid to create your own network if, you have something in mind. The final thing I would say is don't be afraid to just ask. So, say you really need help immediately, or nobody in your existing network is someone who can provide the advice that you need. Number one, leverage the people you do know and see if they know somebody and can make an introduction for you. And number two, just ask. Just reach out and say, I'm thinking about doing X. I see you do X. Would you be willing to talk to me for 15 minutes? I would say most people will say yes. Or, is there some place you recommend, that I go to? I mean, I think people are willing to help.
And we've talked a lot about getting to that point where you want to set out on your own or start your own firm and kind of the mental process and how to tell if it's right for you. But when you do get to that point, what are some tips you have for deciding what entity you should form as, for getting everything kind of together and up and running in that sort of capacity?
Yeah, sure. So the entity question is one that I turn to, a corporate advisor and my accountant to ask, what should I do? Do I need an entity? And in my particular case, my state, I know you had asked me about PLCCs, Professional Limited Liability Corporation. I don't think Pennsylvania has them. In Pennsylvania, lawyers, just like anyone else, can form typical LLCs, limited liability companies. We chose that form because it's, in my case, it's a single member, so I'm the only owner, and it's a pass-through, so it has no real tax. It doesn't really exist from a tax perspective, so that works for me. If you have more than one person, though, a different form might be appropriate, like an LLP. You could also still have an LLC. It depends. I am not a corporate lawyer, so I don't know the benefits of one over another. And like I say, it's both a combination of a tax and a corporate question and a question of what your particular state allows. The other question, though, for attorneys is whether you even need an entity at all. And the way it was explained to me was that, the thing I needed to think about was, I was going to have a place of business that people could come to, so there was liability issues that way. And then I was having an employee, and so because of those things, it made sense for me to create a separate entity, even though I was an attorney practicing on my own. I think if it's just going to be you in your house and you're not going to have any employees, it's worth considering whether, just a sole proprietorship without, an entity makes sense for you. It's just like any other business, right? What do you want to do with it? Do you need it? What's your liability? What's your exposure? The main reason to have an entity, as I understand it, is really about the potential for liability, which we always have still individual potential for liability as an attorney, and that's what malpractice insurance is for. So that's the other thing I would say you need. The main thing you need starting out, you need to review your ethical rules in all the states in which you're admitted, and if you're admitted in more than one, like I am, they have different requirements, and you have to meet the requirements of each and every one of them, which is great fun, let me tell you. Because they're not always the same thing. Some of my states require a physical office. That's why I'm not actively barred in Delaware, because I would have to have a physical office and go there. I don't even go to my physical office that is a 15-minute walk from my house. The chances of me getting in my car and driving somewhere on a regular basis are pretty darn limited. I have a New York office because I'm required to do that because I don't live there. So you need to really look into the requirements of your particular jurisdiction. Some jurisdictions do not require malpractice insurance. I think that's a bad idea, but maybe it's right for you. I would strongly advocate that everyone get at least some amount of malpractice insurance. If you're not an IP lawyer, it's typically not that expensive. If you're an IP lawyer, I'm sorry. It's pretty expensive. But the downside is worse. So you need to look at that. You need to look at whether you need general liability insurance, all those fun topics. You need to think about making sure you have, any tax. I do have a tax ID for the business as well as my own Social Security number, just because you still need that. You have to make sure that you're filing with all of the appropriate local authorities to have a business license. If you're working out of your house, if you're having people come to it, think about zoning. Can you do that? Think about, if you're not going to have a physical address, physical office separate from your home, think about what do you want to put on your website and your business card. I personally think it looks weird when there is no address. It just looks weird to me. But is it wrong? No. Do you want to have like a mail drop somewhere, P.O. box, whatever? I think you have to think about it from your client's perspective. What are they going to expect? And also from attorneys who might refer you work. So you need to think about all that. You need to think about computers, and I would strongly urge people to think about cybersecurity. I actually have a cybersecurity insurance policy. We have spent a lot of time looking at our whole network and cyber issue. If you work with a large company, they'll have requirements around that. Lawyers do get hacked. Typically larger firms are what you would think of would be at more at risk, but there are cases of small firms. So, making sure that and it's an ethical duty, right, to protect your client's data. For that reason, a lot of people do stuff on the Google platform. I'm not a fan. Read terms and conditions very carefully. You start to, I think on some level start to hate lawyers yourself once you start a business because there's all those fun things that you have to read that, maybe you didn't worry about before. So you need to think about that. You need to think about, and then you need to think about stuff that if you're in a law firm right now, you don't need to think about. So how are we going to mail things? Literally, am I going to the post office? Where is the post office? How am I going to, take care of FedEx? Do I need FedEx? Where's my stuff getting copied? What if I need multiple copies of something for, a court filing and it has to be hard copies? What if I'm going into court and I need exhibits? Who's going to do that? Do I need to set up an account? So you just have to think through, all of the little things. And so I would advise you, if you're currently employed, think about all the tools and software and publications and everything that you use every day, make a list, and then investigate cost and make a decision about, is this a must-have now? Is this a nice-to-have? Is this something I don't need? You'd be amazed the amount of things that you utilize on a daily basis that you don't even think about until you are suddenly sitting there without any of them. Also think about form files, the ethical rules around forms. It depends. There's an ABA opinion about moving firms that talks about some of these issues. But, when you're on your own and there's nobody else there for even just simple things, a motion, a certificate of service, contract, you need to think about that and maybe ask permission, to take something with you. Here we have some good resources, Jenkins Law Library, which is available to anyone around the country. It's the oldest law library, I think, in the country. They have a lot of form books. I mean, that's what you have to think about as a solo, right, is that there isn't someone you can pick up and say, do you have a form for this? Right there in your firm. You have to find other resources and just think it through. So I'd really suggest that anyone who's ready to make that leap start thinking about the nitty-gritty before they leap, because especially if you are taking business with you and clients with you and you don't have an admin, you're going to want to have all that set up because you're going to need to be able to hit the ground running. So.
And if you had to give, so I always love this as the last question because I think it just encompasses everything. If you had to give one kind of piece of advice about going solo, maybe something you wish someone had told you, something someone did tell you, what would that be?
I would say don't be afraid to do it. Don't let fear hold you back. It might not be the right decision for you, but don't let fear be the reason you don't do it. And, because the best things I think I've ever done in life have been risky. Just even thinking about getting married and becoming a mom, right? Like you don't know everything. And those are wonderful. And you're never going to have thought of everything, and you're going to have bumps and issues that come up. But more lawyers in this country practice in small firms and probably in solo firms than in larger firms. And if they can do it, you can do it too. So it's not rocket science. It's definitely challenging and it's not for everybody. And I guess the corollary I would say is nothing's fatal, right? So if you do it and it doesn't work, you can go back. There are definitely lawyers who have. Personally, I wouldn't, but that's me because it works for me. So that would be my advice.
Awesome. Nicole, thank you so much for chatting with us today. That was such wonderful advice.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
And so we are going to have this. This was recorded, so I will be sending you the link and everybody who's on the call. I have everybody's email, so we'll be sending the link out too for anybody who couldn't join us today, or if there's just some advice people want to listen to over again and take more notes.
That would be great. Happy to do that.